Welcome, nutritionradio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry, a university nutrition professor of over 20 years and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. Come on in.
Trends in Science.
Hey, everybody. Well, we've got the third and final installment, thank you for indulging, they're only 10-minute episodes, of the SHOP-23 conference. We're just going to wrap up the last few speakers, really focusing on gold nuggets so we can just get through this very cool material, but, there's 9.5 pages of notes here. We just want to cover the last couple. Spaceflight Human Optimization and Performance Summit. The way KBR, which was a affiliate and sponsor of the event, described this was that the conference connects thought leaders in strength conditioning, sports science, physical therapy, athletic training, medicine, engineering, psychology, and nutrition with interest in supporting the physical readiness of astronauts for extended spaceflight. Now you might say, well, I don't care about astronauts, but you really need to look even 10 years ahead and see how space is going to be commercialized. It really might surprise you. And what's more, these are job opportunities. This is going to be sort of a gold rush. I look at it almost like the internet era, right? The companies in the big .com explosion, a lot of these billionaires, people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, they see this next gold rush probably similarly to the internet in at least some ways, because there's all these opportunities to provide the structure and the industries and the laboratories and whatever else it might be for all these companies on Earth that start going to space, realizing that it's a unique environment, whether it's mining asteroids or taking advantage of the microgravity to do amazing, manufacturing or experiments or whatever. But I digress. Let's just get some gold nuggets from each of the final speakers here, and then I'll shut up about spaceflight, at least for a while. Joshua Hagan is a PhD who works with the Air Force and the Ohio State University. He's going to talk on wearable tech. Now, I've done some research on wearable tech, just kind of simple stuff, student research. But wow, this is going to be going places. I mean, already, if you think about it, we have continuous glucose monitoring, CGM, right, where you could simply put a little disc on your triceps, for example, continually monitor blood sugar, including during like long marathons, for athletes, that kind of thing. Coming down the pike, very likely things like lactate monitors. That's going to be cool as sort of an exercise intensity kind of device. Probably other applications. Ketones for you low-carb people. There's going to be just a lot of different things. Of course, there's sleep and heart rate variability, all these different kinds of monitors, and this will come up with other speakers later. But Joshua Hagan was interested in allostatic loads, this culmination, really with a brain focus, in my opinion, of many stressors and the body's ability to deal with the uncertain. Some of Dr. Hagan's introductory stuff talked about a book and some of the research from Kelman and Kenta and a lot of the researchers that I have looked at very closely and spoken about all over the place as far as exercise recovery. Now, obviously, space flight is going to have an exercise component. There's going to be all these kinds of stressors. One cool thing that he shared was that a lot of this stuff with like telemetry is not new. If you look at the history, electrocardiograms from space were happening all the way back in 1959, as I understood it. Wow, that's just like a big deal. It really kind of shows that these devices have a deep, deep history. It's just that they're becoming used in novel ways or integrated so we could figure out other systems, maybe from multiple angles kind of thing. There's 20 active projects going on in this regard right now, just from what he is aware of. A couple of gold nuggets, though. One of the things was that sleep extension in minutes reduces pain sensitivity. If I understand that right, that means sleeping more, less pain sensitivity. That's very curious. I'm going to be looking into that a little bit more. One thing he also noticed about the sleep things, sort of a sidebar, is he said a lot of the current devices don't differentiate sleep stages well. So that was very curious to me because I've used EEG headbands and different types of devices in the past that they kind of claim to do that. And the other major gold nugget I think he talked about was CGM, the continuous glucose monitor. It really shows higher blood glucose values when he travels. Now think about that. It really kind of validates that stressful environment, doesn't it? Like when you travel, there's lots of unknown, lots of things coming at you. Maybe sleep is poor. That might be part of it. We've actually played with fasting glucose measurements and oral glucose tolerance tests in sleep-deprived undergrads that were really very fit, we weren't able to disturb that much, to perturb that system very much. It's under pretty tight control in non-diabetics, as you might guess. But, here with the continuous monitoring, you're just getting more data and you're able to, assess something that is really quite dramatic as far as changing your environment, like travel. But moving on, the next talk was Jennifer Fogarty, Dr. Fogarty. She's the CSO for TRISH. TRISH stands for the Translational Research Institute for Space Health. I've been seeing their call for proposals for years. Just great gold nuggets from Dr. Fogarty. One of them was something that I've experienced myself when I've talked to people in industry as far as funding. She had a quote here, "There's not a market for that." That's what people will say sometimes when you think about different products and their application, I think, in human spaceflight. There's not a market for that, but that's because they don't know one exists. They don't know it exists, so they're just assuming. And that's the kind of thing where you have to kind of create awareness and education in that space. From my perspective, it's been products here on Earth that might apply there. Like maybe it's different nutrients or something like that that might help with space flight, right? There could be a market. We're just talking about the gold rush that's probably coming at us in the next 10 years. A lot of this is contingent on the success of SpaceX and some of these other rocket external involvement and that kind of thing, commercial involvement. But it would go the other way too, right? What kinds of opportunities are in space that could entice companies down here? Not existing products, but something that they might actually want to be in space doing, which could then translate to wealth down here in a different way. Although this whole landscape was new to me, as far as physically going to one of these conferences, it just makes so much sense. I love this logical approach that Dr. Fogarty has as far as we need data-driven decisions, right? Unfortunately, programs don't always last long enough to give data so you could substantiate or make that type of data-driven decision. A couple of gold nuggets, though, further gold nuggets here. Another was this idea of having to define what we want people to be capable of in a specific task on a mission. What dexterity, what strength or other forms of aerobic capacity or cognition, what makes them fit for duty? Defining these requirements early on seems to be really important. You don't have to necessarily maintain the amount of muscular strength, for example, you have here on Earth, because you're going to be in a microgravity environment. The moon or Mars is a fraction, of course, of Earth's gravity. You may not need it. So what amount of decline is actually acceptable? Those sorts of requirements, basal requirements in a sense. Another gold nugget she shared is something that came up later from another speaker was learn early and often. A lot of people say fail early or fail forward. She was sort of pivoting on that, saying, how about just learn early and often? That's what we need to be able to do and scaffold and build on that kind of thing. And then, again, I know this is just coming at you quick, but a final gold nugget was that radiation as a problem here was on par with the microgravity hazard. So I tend to focus on muscle and bone loss so much, but make no mistake, the antioxidants that people get from fruits and vegetables or even coffee, that could really play a role in reducing the ionizing radiation, the damage that people get exposed to in space. You don't want people to go into space for relatively short periods of time, in the future, longer than we've been doing now, and then end up with all kinds of cancers not that much later. I know there's a monitoring program where they look at the astronauts so far, but I think we're moving into durations of space flight that are going to be much longer. And, the radiation is obviously something that you need to think about. Anyway, one of my favorite speakers, such a systematic approach. Good to have someone like that at the helm trying to coordinate this funding with, external laboratories and whatnot. Next up was Jessica Watkins, who's an astronaut. Couple of things from her, 3 gold nuggets. 1, training that they do is very much like periodization with athletes. There's preseason, where they try to make gains. There's in-season, where you're not really trying to make gains necessarily. You're just trying to maintain what strength you can during season, if you will, during the performance time, in this case, the space flight. And then there's post-season, right? And that's sort of the reconditioning. But she said 2 other things that stuck with me. One was that the exercise allotment, that 2.5 hours a day. Now, they're not at target heart rate that entire time, but that's the only me time that they get as astronauts in this otherwise very tightly scheduled operations that they do. That's really interesting to me. I agree with that. I think exercise is really a good time to kind of do that. And the other is on the food side. She said it's not just nutrition, right? It's the center of community. And that's something that I think about when it comes to coffee, which I think has all kinds of applications here, by the way. Yes, I'm biased. But again, I love this idea that food is sort of a social center and it's not just nutrients. Okay, we have time for 2 more speakers here to squeeze in. Just gold nuggets again. Again, speakers that there were other brilliant speakers, but this is food oriented as much as I can bring it about. Michael Harrison was an MD, PhD at Axiom Space. He made a comment, gold nugget number 1, commercial space is going to change in 10 years. I like that a lot. Here's another one, and he answered a question that I had from the beginning of the conference about how do we get average people up there? Because right now it looks like only elite astronauts, elite athletes almost, perfectly mentally and physically, ready can go. That's not going to work in the long run. So he said NASA gets 18,000 applicants and picks 10. We want to reverse that, right? In other words, how sick can one be and still go into space? Can you be pre-diabetic or even diabetic, right? Obviously, this depends on the position. If you're going to be a pilot, you're going to have different requirements from another person that's along for the ride. But I really like this democratizing idea. Yeah, it's going to bring some risk. I'm sure it is. And he also, another gold nugget, he said mental health is something they need to think about more seriously. It's even handled poorly here on Earth. People get labeled, right? And you won't be able to do X, Y, or Z. I like that approach as well. So he was full of great gold nuggets as far as democratizing space. Okay, we have one more. It's going to be quick here in today's news, right? Our trends in science. And this is a real long-reaching trend, of course. Marissa Rosenberg, Dr. Rosenberg, she's a PhD, senior medical research engineer at SpaceX. Another super cool title. I met these great senior researchers from Blue Origin and SpaceX. Here they come. Number 1, it is the right time to be ambitious when it comes to research projects. I love that. Now, there's a price to pay, right? Because they're going to want you to demonstrate. I used to tell students, demonstrate, don't speculate. I mean, unless you're saying that you're speculating. So it's the right time to be ambitious. Gold nugget number 2, rapidly iterate. This is what I love about Elon Musk and the starships. Something blows up, you learn and you move forward, right? Like we heard earlier, learn and move forward. Rapid iteration. A high production output cures most problems. And I think that's also true with data collection. It's not just a product. Use first principles. I read Elon Musk's autobiography. I see where this is coming from. Question all requirements, right? Why? Why do we need X? Or who? Or how? Or what? Really boil it down to the basic principles, those first principles. I love it. And number 3, what's the minimal physical capabilities that are acceptable and the declines upon landing? Now, that really kind of harkens back to something we heard earlier, doesn't it? Oh, and you know what? I lied. One last thing, and you guys who are interested in sports nutrition and even pharmacology will appreciate this. They are really focusing on pharmaceutical countermeasures. There was some talk at the conference of anabolics like testosterone and preserving muscle and bone mass. Makes a lot of sense. I think if they overdo that, of course, they could potentially cause some sexual conflicts moving forward. You know, if you're in a small space with the opposite sex for a long time, it's really hard to even speculate. There were talks on mental health, which is sort of beyond today's scope. But pharmaceutical countermeasures, and then when it comes to exercise, they were all about, it seems like at this point, VR headsets, gamifying exercise, zero-G sports, like actual Quidditch, things like that. Very interesting stuff. While you wear monitors, right, from an earlier talk, and then you've got these wearables providing all this data on heart rate or lactate or blood glucose or whatever. Really cool, and all happening sort of autonomously. Really clever ideas there, but we are way out of time. I appreciate your patience today while I geeked out with this last thing. Again, why listen to some of these podcasts like this one, like nutritionradio.org? It's forward-reaching. It's telling you what science is coming down the pike, so you know what's happening. All right, so that's enough for today. We'll see you later. The nutritionradio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.